So prominent 2020 Democrats have come together to introduce a bill that would wipe out Puerto Rican debt. Now, The Intercept is reporting that Senators Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders are introducing the bill called the U.S. Territorial Relief Act of 2018. Now, they are joined by Senator Kamala Harris and Kirsten Gillibrand. So that puts many of the Senate's top contenders for the presidency on the record that they believe that we should wipe out Puerto Rico's debt. Now, right now, Puerto Rico carries over $70 billion in debt. A lot of it is from, of course, vulture capital firms, which is unsecured debt, and therefore eligible for relief. So look at that. We have unity in actually trying to do something for Puerto Rico. Now, that's awesome because, look, some of these Democrats actually supported the previous bill, which has been disastrous for Puerto Rico. Now, one of them was Kirsten Gillibrand. Now, she supported PROMESA, as it's dubbed, which created a fiscal oversight board in order to manage Puerto Rico's affairs. Now, what has that board done since they were appointed? And by the way, this was before they had a debt crisis before the hurricanes. So in order to try to tackle that debt, this board put in austerity proposals, which have led to mass protests, as well as a wave of privatization. Now, a lot of the assets here are sold off to finance interest payments. So that's what the board has been doing. Yeah, we privatize things, we sell it off, we sell public assets to private corporations, and then we use that money to pay off our interest to these vulture capital firms that swooped in and tried to buy off some of this debt. Well, that doesn't help the Puerto Rican people, and especially now after the hurricane. Now, the selling point in PROMESA, however, was the creation of a bankruptcy-like mechanism that could be used to wipe out some debt legally. Now, that is some debt, and unfortunately, they haven't really used that. Now, since the hurricanes, of course, basically destroyed the island's infrastructure, Puerto Rico is now in the position of having to rebuild, attract economic investment, and pay down their debt. Now, that is something that is very, very difficult to do, and they have not gotten a lot of help. In fact, Elizabeth Warren, in introducing this piece of legislation, said Puerto Rico was already being squeezed before Hurricane Maria hit and will now have to rebuild under the weight of crushing debt. Our bill gives territories that have suffered an extraordinary crisis a route to comprehensive debt relief and a chance to get back on their feet. Now, there's a House companion bill that's also being sponsored by Representative Nydia Velázquez. She said, after Maria, Puerto Rico needs every tool possible to recover physically and economically. This legislation provides another path for the island to get back on its feet and begin the journey toward a brighter future. I thank Senator Warren for her leadership, and I plan to introduce the House companion in September. Now, let me give you the details on what this bill actually includes. Now, under the bill, territories can opt for relief of unsecured public debt if they meet 2 out of 3 criteria. Now, that would be a population decrease of more than 5% over the past 10 years, the receipt of federal disaster assistance, and per capita debt over $15,000 per resident. Puerto Rico, just to show you how badly Puerto Rico has been suffering, they qualify under 3 of these factors, all 3 of them. They have seen a massive population decrease. They've, of course, got hit by 2 hurricanes, so their federal disaster assistance, and, of course, that large amount, that $70 billion in debt. Now, the U.S. Virgin Islands also qualifies, by the way, under these 3 factors, so let's not forget about them. Now, the option, which could be used once every 7 years, would have to be ratified by the territory's legislature and governor, or by 2/3 vote of the legislature. Now, under the bill, creditors would have the opportunity to contest the discharge of their bonds in a streamlined judicial proceeding. So, yes, creditors are also being represented here as well. However, this is a great mechanism for putting that to the test. Do these creditors have a good case? Or do they not have a good case because they came in and basically swooped this up at incredibly low rates? Now, the bill creates a $15 billion taxpayer-funded compensation fund to benefit Puerto Rican creditors, like residents, local businesses, and banks, and union and public pension plans, as long as it's taken up 3 years of enactment. So, if you have legitimate firms and not the vulture firms that would be hurt by this, there's a fund set up for them so that they can still be able to recoup some of their money, which is a good thing and sort of addresses that, hey, what about legitimate creditors? Like, what about, local businesses? What about banks that took out bonds? What are we going to do? Well, you're not going to get left in the dark, so that's great. Now, there are other firms, of course, that hold a lot of debt, like mutual funds like Oppenheimer and Franklin Advisors. Now, they manage Puerto Rico debt for retail investors in the United States. Now, they would also be eligible for some compensation if they waive managers' fees on it as well. A special master would allocate the funds. Losses would fall primarily on hedge fund speculators who scooped up Puerto Rican debt in search of a quick payday, though the losses would ultimately be relatively minimal given the bargain basement prices that investors paid for the junk bonds. Warren said, quote, "Disaster funding and other resources in struggling territories, budgets must not go to Wall Street vulture funds who snapped up their debt." Meanwhile, the Compensation Would Act, bill sponsors hope, as supplementary disaster relief for local bondholders to kickstart the economy. And the bill also creates an audit commission to explore causes and sources of Puerto Rican debt. So, look, again, a lot of this sounds really, really good and really, really helpful for people in Puerto Rico, which, again, has been just devastated. Not only by the hurricanes, but prior to that, they were facing an enormous debt crisis, which has led to a lot of pain, which, unfortunately, we have not paid a lot of attention to. Now, one question is here, well, is this actually legal? Can they actually do this, right? Is this kosher, right? As some people might ask. Well, Warren and Sanders have supplied a letter of support from 7 law professors who specialize in bankruptcy law, led by Georgetown University's Adam Levitin. Quote, he said, "This is a bold stroke, the legislative equivalent of cutting through the Gordian knot. It recognizes the dire financial situation in the territories and awards relief without the time-consuming and expensive process of traditional bankruptcy proceeding. The professors concluded the law was indeed constitutional, consistent with Congress's authority to create rules on bankruptcy and for U.S. territories." So yes, it is legal. It is constitutional. They can eliminate this debt, and they can help Puerto Rico actually start to recover. They can help local business owners. They can help residents. They can help local banks. And they can even help some of the bigger creditors. But it's those vulture funds, those capitalists that swoop in and take advantage of places that have seen disaster. Those are the people that are going to lose out. So I think for all concerned, it's kind of a win-win. So this is a great piece of legislation. I don't think the Trump administration is going to take it up. So what we have to do is we have to make sure that we elect people who do care about Puerto Rico, people who do support this piece of legislation or pieces of legislation like this, get them into power, and then we can actually help Puerto Rico. Because the problem is not going away if we ignore it. And we've ignored Puerto Rico for way too long. Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you want to see more like this, please hit the subscribe button below. And if you want to support truly independent progressive media, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/TYTNation.